and I have been active in the 12-step program for about almost 15 years now, and it really has saved my life, and I think saved my marriage too. And so that part of my story is, well, I was able to, tap into autobiography.
I'm Nathan Maharaj, and this is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is Wally Lamb. He's the author of novels including She's Come Undone, I Know This Much Is True, and The Hour I First Believed. His new novel, his first in nearly a decade, is The River Is Waiting. It's about Corbin Ledbetter, Corby to his friends, husband to Emily, and father to twins Maisie and Niko. Corby's at the precipice of midlife when he makes a terrible, and I mean capital T, terrible mistake. It's the kind of mistake I think most of us would struggle to imagine ever coming back from. But that's what Corby has to figure out as he endures punishments from society, from family, and the harshest judge of all, himself. Wally Lamb, welcome to Kobo.
Hey, Nathan, I'm happy to be here.
I alluded to this terrible mistake that Corby makes very early in the book, but would like to ask you to set this story up from us and take us, if you will, up to and perhaps a couple steps through that horrible event.
Well, when the story opens up, he's the father of 2-year-old twins. They're fraternal twins, but one is a boy, one's a girl, and he's in a sort of an unhappy place in his life. He has been a commercial artist, and he is at home with the kids. They can't afford daycare, so and he loves the kids very much, but he's a little bit unfulfilled. And he's also apologetic that he is not doing anything to provide for his family. He's that much of a traditionalist, I guess. Anyway, he gets a prescription for an anti-anxiety drug without fully realizing that a lot of those drugs are addictive, the benzos. And then he is also day drinking, and he's child caring, day drinking, and he starts to overdrink. And so he is in denial at the beginning of the book that he has become an addict, and he there's a morning where he is going to drop the kids off at their grandmother's house, and then he is allegedly going to go job hunting. And instead, his plan is to go home and get faced
Mm.
and then sober up and then go pick up the kids. He wants a day away from the kids, a day off, and so he straps the kids in, or thinks he's strapped both of the kids in to the back seat of the van that he's driving. And as he is getting he gets into the car, and then the neighbors from across the street call to him, and he has a little chat with them, and he does not realize in his somewhat dazed state that he has forgotten to strap his little boy in, and that the boy is still in the driveway. He backs up and runs over the child, and who is then brought to the ambulance under emergency situation, and his wife is away, and when he by the time the that he's about ready to get to the hospital too, the police show up, and they immediately are suspicious, and so they begin a sort of investigation on the spot. And he goes to the hospital, his blood is tested, and he is over the legal limit. So now we're talking about a crime being committed, not just a terrible, tragic accident. And so that pretty much brings us into the story.
Yeah, it's a start that really brings Corby to the bottom, to the
Mhm.
bottom of any scale you care to measure a life events from, which kind of sets up a redemption story. I think is that we're if we're going to follow this character, he's going to have to atone for some things, but he's got so much to atone for.
Yeah, yeah. And the question I ask readers is redemption, is forgiveness even possible for somebody in this situation? And his wife hasn't known, she's maybe had some suspicions, but she hasn't known that he has been, overdoing the booze and the benzos. So that comes as a horrible surprise to her as well.
Yeah, there are so many levels, and you give the reader knows more than his wife Emily does. From the start, we know he's out of control. We also know he's lying because we're inside his head. We're watching him manage perceptions of others, or thinking he's managing perceptions to the extent that to the extent that in the mind of an addict that you can, but one certainly works at it, and Corby works at
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, it's true. Addicts have become very talented liars to cover their tracks.
Mhm, mhm. Were you ever concerned that with all that you're giving the reader so early on, with this horrible tragedy, with the horrible judgment Corby's exercising, was there ever concern that, you know, is the reader going to go with me on this? Are they going to take on this journey with this character?
Yeah, I was worried about that, but I learned long ago to shoo the reader or the prospective reader out of the writing room while I'm writing, and to just you know sort of fall in sympathy with the character and take, I never write with an outline. It sounds like I could write a lot faster if I had an ability to know where the story was going, but I don't. And so what happened to me when I went to write my third novel uh, is that the first two had been selected for the Oprah Book Club. And so I had a wild ride with She's Come and Done, and I know this much is true. It was thrilling and it was exciting and so forth. And then, the hoopla and the excitement sort of died down. And okay, time to write novel number three. Can I do it? I'm riddled with lack of confidence. And so I started with an idea that didn't work out. I started with another idea. I had to scrap that and so forth. And so I spun my wheels for about, I think it was almost a year. And I was ready to give the advance money back and go back to high school teaching because I just didn't think I could pull it off. It was that sort of imposter syndrome. And I had just gotten lucky twice, and I wasn't going to get lucky a third time. And so I was just riddled with self-doubt. And then I remembered something that early writing teacher has said to me. She said, because when I was just starting to write She's Come Undone, this teacher, Gladys Swan, said, "Well," she said, why are you doing this? Why do you want to write this?" And I said, "Well, I'm a high school teacher, and I want to write a book that high school kids would read because they want to, not because they have to." And I thought that was a good answer, but
Hmm.
she made a face
Hmm.
and she said, "Don't," she says, "don't do that to yourself. Don't prescribe who your audience is going to be." She said, "Write it, make it the most truthful that you can to satisfy your sense of truth, and then have faith that the readers who are meant to read the book are going to find it." And she says, "So don't think of it in terms of an age group or anything like that." The other story, I couldn't come up with an idea, I couldn't come up with an idea. And then finally, one day, I said to myself, I have to get back to, how I started. And I gotta open the office door and invite everybody, all these prospective readers, And then I had a lot of them after two
Yeah.
Oprah Book Club picks. I said, I have to politely tell them to leave the room, and it just has to be about me and the story. And that's when I truly started with The Hour I First Believed.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to The River is Waiting, I want to talk about Corby. There's so much to talk about with Corby. The man has layers. He's so complicated is what I think you really get across. The people are complicated. They are contradictions constantly.
Hmm.
When the police are interrogating him, the when you talk about that scene in the hospital where the police are kind of trying to pin him down, I get a sense that what they're trying to do to this character that we've spent several chapters with and we've gotten to know in his many contradictions, they're trying to uncomplicate him. They're looking for they're looking for the pattern they need to say this parent who's done this awful negligent thing is in fact a negligent parent. Um, this isn't a person who made a mistake once. This is a careless person, a reckless person. It feels unfair, and I wonder if my reaction of finding myself aligned with Corby, being a parent myself, knowing that it's a game where you're aiming for a decent batting average, but you're gonna strike out sometimes,
Of course.
right? And I thought I was sympathetic to Corby in that scenario where they were trying to take they were trying to look for every mistake they could find in his parenting and chalk it up to who he actually is. Was my sympathetic reaction something was is that just my stuff, or is that kind of something that you were feeling as you were sketching out, as you were writing the scene where he's getting kind of cornered?
Hmm. Oh, that's fair. My reaction to the character as I was writing him is very much like yours. I was rooting for him. I was disapproving of him, and yet I was able to see the complexity that those cops did not. And I think that gets back to my experience with teaching incarcerated people. I
Mhm.
worked at a volunteer program at a women's institution for about 20 years,
Mhm.
and I got to know these people, some of whom had done terrible things to get to go to prison, and but I began to see that they were multifaceted, and I began to see that they would be they would be judged very harshly by people reading the newspaper accounts of what they had done, or even worse, the 6 o'clock news, where everything is sort of truncated. But I began, I liked these women, and some of the women who had done the most terrible things were very likable and very much, more than just the one terrible thing that they had done to become convicted and go to, in some cases, these horribly lengthy prison sentences. So I approached it that way,
Mm.
so yeah, I was rooting for him, along with um, thinking to myself, get your together, Corby. Come on, stop making excuses and work on this redemption that you're seeking.
Yeah, yeah. Corby is in his mid 30s when we meet him. It occurred to me that he's younger than you were when your first novel was published. He's
Yeah.
certainly younger than I am now. I wonder uh, what parts of him do you relate to now as you write a character so far. I mean, Corby is he could be the age of one of your children. Like this is the age he is. How do you relate to him, or is it through a memory of things you felt and thought at that age? What's that emotional connection?
Well, I was very conscious of writing a character younger than I. For the first two or three novels, I assigned them each of the protagonists a birthday, and it was always my birthday. So I'm not that good at math, so it was always good to calculate. Okay, if they were born in 1950, like I was, then they would be this age at this. So, but this time I wanted to write somebody younger, and so. Uh, what happened when I started the novel, was that I had just recently read an article in the newspaper, and it was about these horrible backover accidents. And it described how in out of 10 of the cases, it's usually, the parent of a toddler, and the parent doesn't see the child in the camera at the back of the vehicle. And so it really creeped me out, particularly because our older son, Jared, had a 3-year-old and an infant. And so that article got very personal to me. And so much so that I called up Jared and I said, and he was in New Orleans. He was living and teaching in New Orleans. And I said, Jared, you don't have a backup camera, right? And he said, no. And I had just bought a new
Mhm.
car, a new Honda, with it had a backup camera. And I said, if you'll fly up, I'll give you my car, and for safety's sake, and then you can drive back, and I'll just get another car. And so he did that, and he brought the 3-year-old with him. So we had a little visit with our grandson Ethan, and he drove off with my car, and I got the exact same car, same color and everything, as a replacement vehicle. But I was just I got so afraid that something like horrible would happen. Not that he would be inebriated or anything, but just that, he would just be careless for a couple of seconds. And
Yeah, exactly. You give us a glimpse into the past, into the past that Corby and Emily shared before they're married. We get their youth. I wonder what did you I feel like I'm misstepping now because you've said the reader has been politely asked to leave the room.
that's well, you can come back now.
Yet I need to ask, as you sketched out these scenes with Corby and Emily, I mean, what I want to ask is what did you want the reader to get from these scenes, but maybe what did it give you to explore the shared history of these characters?
Well, I think it was about, I don't know, maybe the second chapter in or the
Hmm.
third chapter, and I needed to know these characters better, and of course, so I needed to delve into their history and their backstory and how they came to be a couple, and why they decided to marry and so forth. So really, it might be chapter 2 or chapter 3, but it was research for me.
Hmm.
I wanted to get the full account of them before the tragedy, and so. I questioned whether I should put that before the tragedy or not, sort of lay the groundwork for the tragedy, and then go backwards for a little bit. So that's how I did it.
Yeah. Is that a normal part of your process? As you say, you don't work from an outline, but it sounds like a very intuitive thing where you will intuit kind of what do you need to know next? What's the area you need to explore in order to tell the rest of the story, in order to take the character where they need to go? Does that always end up in the book? Or do you sometimes do these exercises just to get to know them and then sort of
Mhm.
bury sink that part of the iceberg below the water, as it were?
Yes, sometimes that happens where, and not necessarily, I'm not necessarily thinking I'm not going to use it in the book, but sometimes it just doesn't fit in the story. It's like a story for me can be like almost like a jigsaw puzzle, and so you put these pieces together and you sort of take things out of time so that it's not chronological, and so sometimes I use that material and sometimes I don't, but I'm all my aim is always to get to know them on deeper and deeper levels, particularly the main character of the story. My when I started working with my editor on this, I hadn't shown her much of it at all, and then I showed her about the first 100 pages, and in that version, in that first draft that I shared with her, um, Corby and Emily were sort of their stories were being told in tandem. So it would be a Corby chapter from his point of view, and then it would be an Emily chapter from her point of view, and then it would go back and forth and back and forth. And she was the one who said, decide whose story you're telling, and then you can always you can always tell Emily's story, but do it from Corby's perspective. And so I was reluctant at first, and then the more I thought about it, I go, yeah, okay, that sounds right. And so, so I scrapped the Emily point of view chapters and reworked the thing. And I ended up being very glad that I did that. I also work in writers groups, and
Hmm.
I work with writers. They and I have worked in a group for maybe at least a couple of decades, maybe longer, and so these are writers I trust and who trust me, and so I'm getting feedback as I'm writing these stories over 5, 6, in some cases almost 10 years. I'm relying on their feedback and giving them feedback. And I find that lots of times when you can prescribe for another writer, you can go back and go, oh yeah, that would apply to me too. And so it's a nice give and take.
Yeah, it's isn't it often the case that the most interesting problems other people have are in fact our own problems?
Yes, yes, oh yeah, for sure. And that's about more than just writing too.
Yeah, that one goes deep. One of the things that stood out to me about those dips into Corby's past was that there's so much work. There's so much of him at work, of him really putting in effort and toil, but also having purpose. And it contrasts so starkly to when we meet him. Because when we meet him, as you say, he's in a very uncomfortable place. He is without work. He is, I mean, we don't want to say he's idle, but he's certainly not, his energy isn't going where he'd like it to go.
Mhm.
And we get a sense through this contrast of seeing him in these different eras of how much it matters, of how much it matters to him to be doing something, that he's a different person when he's working, when he's got purpose. And that really softened my judgment of him. I wonder about exploring that character as you wrote these different pieces of his history. If it was a surprise to you to find how different a person he was in these different circumstances.
Yeah. Um, uh, I was very I was very interested in exploring his relationship with his parents,
Mm,
and particularly his rather troubled relationship with his father, who he never felt quite approved of by his father. And then the father leaves. He's an academic. He leaves. Corby decides he does not want to follow in his father's footsteps as a scientist, and he's going to become an artist. And the father is, not happy with that. And also, the father, as many academics do, marries one of his students, and it turns out to be, and that's Corby's mother, and it turns out to be not a happy marriage. And she begins to smoke weed and experiment with alternate religions like Wiccan and that kind of thing. And so he's got a hippie mother and a straight-laced father, and he's sort of caught between the two of them, and doesn't quite approve of himself in some ways, and then becomes uh, sort of defensive about that as well.
yeah. Yeah. It does strike me that there's there's a conversation he has with his mother. It's a brief exchange after uh I think it's in the hospital when if Nico's either being worked on or if they've or if he's already died. But his mother is talking sweetly uh about how much she loves Nico, about how Nico reminds her of Corby when he was little. And and she's so soft in that, but she's also Corby resists it a little bit because he feels like she doesn't quite grasp that he's the reason Nico's gone. And he while she's pouring out this tenderness to him, he has to also push back. And I realized Corby's never quite, I don't think he's quite been loved the way he needed to be loved. He certainly didn't get it from his dad. And then the love he got from his mom, it's like he wanted more discrimination or something in that love. He wanted a more discerning love. and it's there's something he just can't take in about that. That's such an interesting note that you put in there. Can you tell me about that contrast of the hippie mother and that outpouring of love that doesn't quite hit the mark?
Yes, well, she's in some ways I'm just thinking this now as an answer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was conscious on my part when I was writing the novel, but I think, is somewhat apologetic to Corby because of the father's harshness. And so whereas the father tends to be unforgiving and dissatisfied, she is trying to balance the opposite and maybe enabling Corby with by so doing. The father, when he finds out, the mother calls the father, his her estranged husband or her ex-husband, and she tells him what's happened. And Corbin Senior calls Corby, and immediately, in a typical male thing, he's gonna fix it. So I got you an attorney. I pulled
Hmm.
some strings, and she's gonna talk to you tomorrow, and so forth. And so I think I was interested in the female, the typical female versus the typical male response. The dad was gonna dad would- dad was gonna rescue him, and mom was gonna hug him and make sure he was okay, even though there was this terrible sadness and tragedy.
Hmm. Hmm. The timeline of The River is Waiting starts in 2017, which I thought was interesting. I I think I know the answer to why you said it then. I kind of hope it's not the answer. And my answer and the answer I'm suspecting is that writing about prisons in the era of COVID would have been a whole mess of things not to get into. But maybe the answer is something else. Why set it in 2017?
Well, I didn't know where it was going, and so I said it in 2017 because that's when I started the novel. I can equate it to our first granddaughter. Her birth was, in fact, I started the first chapters of the novel when we were down south in Louisiana, helping out with the newborn, and she was, when I finished it. I had been working on it for about 7 years, and Olivia was 7 years old, right? So back in 2017, I had no idea that there was going to be a pandemic coming that was going to shut down all of our lives. But then when I realized that years have to pass, he's given a 3-year sentence. Now we're in 2020,
Hmm.
and it wasn't like I could ignore the fact that COVID was happening, particularly because it was it was a terrible thing happening in prison because not all of the guards um, were compliant as far as wearing masks, and they were in and out of the prison. They had their own
Yep.
lives, and so forth. And so and then there's such a close proximity, the chow hole and so forth. So I had not realized that this was going to happen, that COVID was going to cast its shadow on Corby and his life in prison. But I couldn't avoid it. So that's when I went back and did a lot of internet research and read prisoners' accounts of their life under COVID conditions,
Mhm.
and also because I had worked in prison for all those years, at the women's prison. I heard from their stories too about some of their frustrations about non-compliance, or they had all these protocols at the prison, but they didn't nobody none of the administrators would necessarily follow through on making sure that the protocols were being obeyed.
Mhm.
So it looked good. It looked like it was being dealt with, and not necessarily that wasn't necessarily the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, can I ask why you started in 2017? We're talking in 2025. This is a novel that took some time to come out. What was it a hard novel to write? Was that what made it take 9 years to to come out?
It was a hard novel to write because you live if you're writing first person point of view, you are living at your life during your work day. You are that character, and of course, because he's had such a hard life, you know it's your hard life too. And I've never had any acting experience, but when I hear actors talk about their work, where they get out of their own life, drop their own life on the stage floor or the in the film scene and inhabit some other life. That's what it's like for me. So yes, it was a hard novel to write. No, it didn't take me all 9 years. I was working 2 years on the first 2 years before I started. I was working on editing an anthology of my writing students'
Hmm.
work, and so I was elsewhere involved, and so it actually took me about 7 years to write, not nine.
Yeah, yeah. We have talked a lot about Corby. Emily, his wife, is also a very interesting character. You mentioned that she at one point was a much larger character in this book when it was a little more diffuse. Um, One of the things I find so interesting about her is that her identity gets splintered by this event, this accident, the death of of one of her twin children, because she's separated from him by this in so many in an emotional way, physically as well as he's then processed by a criminal justice system. But identities she has to reckon with is yes, she is still Corby's wife. She is the mother of his remaining child, but she also has her own relationship with Maisie, the surviving child. Um, as she finds support from her family, she finds herself thrown more into the role of daughter as well. She's she's
Mhm.
she's thrown back in under her mother in a variety of ways. It just strikes me as an impossible division, and especially to go through it with your life partner suddenly removed. Not only removed, but removed because they're the cause of it all. You spoke a little bit about an earlier version of the novel where Emily is was kind of half of it. But tell me about how we got the Emily that we read about, this voice that we only get through Corby, but is so rich and multifaceted.
Well, she's very angry, and she may want to forgive and not be able to, and then where does that leave her? She's you mentioned her mother. Her mother has never liked or even approved of Corby, and so she has always been, metaphorically, she's been whispering in her daughter's ear, that he's not worthy of her.
Mm.
And of course, then there's the proof of this, you might say, when Corby does this terrible thing and becomes a prisoner. She has to set boundaries, and one of those boundaries is that she won't be visiting him in prison on a regular basis. She manages a couple, maybe three visits, and that's it. And she won't bring their daughter to see him, even though he's hungering to see Maisie, and that's partly her inability to forgive him, but also she's not sure how to survive all this. She's not sure how she can handle being in the grocery store and in the aisles of the grocery store and having people see, oh, you know who that is? That's the woman whose husband did such and such. And it's very it's just it's kind of it's unsolvable for her. Um, she does get her voice by the end of the story, and the story ends. I think there's a couple of chapters at the end where it's her point of view, and so I withheld that point of view for most of the novel, and then I took the gag off of her and let her speak and let her tell you, the reader, what's happened and how she's moved on and why she's moved on.
Mhm. Mhm. Another character that's important to Corby is Manny, his eventual cellmate in prison. He's annoying. He's a little bit free with Corby's possessions. He's just kind of a lot, but he's got this firm core of goodness inside of him. Like Manny is a bundle of annoying things wrapped around a truly golden heart. It felt so real so quickly, this character. Just like he snapped into focus for me very suddenly. I was like, I know this guy. Sometimes I might be this guy. Tell me, tell me about writing Manny, bringing Manny into the book and into Corby's cell.
Yes, I've known these or annoying but good-hearted people in my own life. And sometimes you feel apologetic because you find them so annoying, but they're good people. And so I saw Manny that way. Um, and he's one of three characters who uh, give Corby a little bit of respite. I see that happening with the prison librarian,
Hmm.
and who takes a shine to him. He becomes a sort of a surrogate mother during his incarceration, and the CO, the correctional officer, Mr. Mr. Cavanero, Officer Cavanero, who is very unlike some of the rather horrible COs that abuse their power with Corby. And so those three signposts, and Manny is one of those three. And he becomes pivotal toward the end of the story because he's the one who reaches out to Emily and says, "I have things I want to tell you about, and things I want to give to you." And so he's out of prison at that point, and he's working at Cinnabon in the mall, and he's been hired to do the kind of work that one of the things I learned by working with inmates is how limited their job uh, uh, opportunities are when they get out of prison with a felony conviction.
Hmm.
And so I thought that was I, I just was glad that he extended a hand to Emily and helped her to sort of see a different side of Corby or see things that she didn't know about, and that begins her ability to find a way, to forgive her husband.
Hmm. Hmm. There's there's a little piece of wisdom that Corby is offered following an AA meeting. He begins to attend AA meetings. He begins to deal with what his addiction hath wrought, and what he's told is you just have to figure out how to live with yourself without drinking over it. At least that's what I had to do. Is that a piece of wisdom that you believe in yourself, or is that a thing that works for some people and maybe isn't for everybody?
Well, I lived a version of that.
Yeah.
This was in my I was a late bloomer as far as my own uh, abuse of alcohol. I started drinking alcoholically in my 50s.
Mm.
It was really kind of a perfect storm. My parents were becoming very old and very needy. We had just adopted a third child, and he was a very troubled child coming out of a horrible set of circumstances.
Hmm.
And I had this damn third novel that I was trying to write that was such a struggle. And so all of that sort of combined to my life was just so painful at that point. And so I started, numbing myself by drinking at night. And so that went on for about maybe 10 years. And I finally decided, I could lose my wife. I could lose my career. I don't want this to have to affect my kids.
Hmm.
And so, as you do at these meetings, I had to declare myself, hi, I'm Wally and I'm an alcoholic. And that was very liberating for me, actually. It was difficult but liberating. And I have been active in the 12-step program for about almost 15 years now,
Mm.
and it really has saved my life, and I think saved my marriage too.
Mm.
And so that part of my story is, well, I was able to, tap into autobiography when he goes to those meetings.
Yeah.
And one of the things that somebody says to him is what somebody said to me, when I was sharing, and how difficult it was. At that point, our adopted son had, his biological parents were addicts and alcoholics, and he was sort of following that route. Was uh, he was about 14 or so, and he was kind of a nightmare to have living in the house. And so, I said at a meeting, I love him, but I don't want him to keep sucker punching. I want to hope for the best for him, but I don't want to keep being disappointed over and over and over again. But somebody came up to me after one of those meetings and he said, no, he says, hope will never sucker punch you, but expectations will. And he pointed out to me that our son's journey toward sobriety, I came to see that no, I can't fix it. Only he can fix it, and the only person I can fix is me.
Mm.
So that's where my life and Corby's life kind of crisscrossed.
Yeah. Yeah. Wally, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad I did, because your questions are probing, and they're making me think, and I like the challenge of doing that, Nathan.
Oh, well, it's been a delight to challenge you, Wally. I have been speaking with Wally Lamb, author of The River is Waiting. Find it and all of his books, including the big ones Oprah picked back in the 90s, which we could have talked a lot about those. You got to understand, for us booksellers who came up in the 90s, Wally Lamb is kind of a patron saint. It's kind of a big deal. Find all of those books at Kobo and Conversations home on the web. It's kobo.com/conversation. There's a link in the show notes. Check that out. It's easy. Subscribe, follow, do what you need to do in your podcast player to catch every episode. If you enjoyed this one, tell somebody who loves you despite your mistakes, or at least would take a book recommendation from you. Kobo and Conversation was produced and hosted this time by me, Nathan Maharaj. Thank you for listening.